What are those guys? Docker volumes. What are the Docker volumes, guys? Volumes are used to persist the data which is generated by Docker container, which is Docker container. Docker volumes are used to persist the data which is generated by the Docker container. Right? Docker container having, hey guys, Docker container having only 1 GB, right? With all the libraries, image, and your application also. But where the logs will be, I think we need a persistent. Persistent means database. We need a Docker volumes are used to avoid the data loss. What is that? Volumes are used to avoid the data loss, right? Using using these volumes, using volumes, we can make container as a stateful container, stateful container, and so we have three types of brothers. We have three types of volumes in Docker. So how many types of volumes in Docker, guys? So one is anonymous volume. So anonymous volume means no name. There is no name for this volume. The second one is, what is the second one? The second one is named volumes. What is that, guys? Named volumes. The third one is bind. Third one is bind mounts. What are those? Named values, bind mounts, and anonymous volumes. So how you can check the Docker volumes by default? So you can display Docker volumes. Docker volumes. How you can display the Docker volumes? Docker Docker volume ls. You can check the Docker volume. Ls is the command. Next, create a Docker. Create a Docker volumes. How to create the Docker volume, guys? So we can create the Docker volume by using Docker command. Docker volume inspect volume volume name. Right, this is nothing but a Docker volume. Create a Docker volume. How to create the Docker volumes? Docker volume creation. Right. This is nothing but a Docker volume creation. Next, inspect Docker volumes. So this is nothing but a create a Docker volume, right? Docker volume, create a Docker volume. Docker volume, create a Docker volume. So display the Docker volumes. You can use the display the Docker volumes and so inspect means we can get the all the details. Inspect Docker volume. Inspect the Docker volume. Docker volume. Inspect volume name. Volume name. In the next one, how to remove the Docker volumes. Remove Docker volume. Docker volume. How to remove the Docker volume? By using Docker volume rm vlu volume name. Okay, volume name. Remove all volumes. Or you can remove all the volumes. You can remove all the volumes by using Docker system prone hyphen hyphen volumes. It will prone the all the volumes, making a container stateful using bind mounting. So what is that, guys? Yeah, Docker volume, something like so I want to, this is the index.html. I want to use this index.html in the web server and web server too. Docker volumes mounted EC2 instance. So the volumes will be mounted on the EC2 instances. Something like this is the EC2 EC2 VM. So this is the EC2 VM and the container is created within the EC2. This is the file, right? A Docker host server, the volumes. So this is the Docker volumes mounted EC2 instance. Docker volumes. Docker volumes are used to persist the data generated by the Docker containers. Using Docker volumes can decouple the data storage from the Docker container. Using Docker volume, we can share the data among the multiple Docker containers. One deletion of the Docker container volume will not be deleted. So how to check the Docker volumes commands to display the Docker volume? So Docker volume hyphen help create the Docker volume volume name volume ls Docker inspect Docker volume inspector remove the Docker volume remove unused volumes. Okay, how we can share the data from the one container to another container? So for example, so that container needs to share the data on container 1 and container 2. How it possible? It is not possible by using the one container. We can share the data in the three ways. One is Docker volume creation one, another one is Docker volume creation two. Right? The Docker volume creation one, pulling the Nginx image from the Docker Hub, Docker pull Nginx. So running the running the Nginx image using the Docker container. How you can create? How can you can run the Docker container? Docker run hyphen name web app 1 hyphen d hyphen p port number. This is the container port. This is the host port and the container name. Access static website using the EC2 VM public IP, which is hosted by the Nginx. Modify the static website content index.html. The file is available in the container. Docker exe it. How you can execute the commands in the IT, guys? So you can use the exe-it web app 1 bash. So it will connect to the server. Then go to the CD user share nginx HTML. So echo welcome to Tech World with Hari or BlueJ Technologies index.html. So access the static website using the EC2VM public IP, which is hosted by the Nginx. Modified content should be displayed here. Docker stop container ID. So it will stop the container. Docker run name web2-d 8080. You created as a second container. Created as a second container. Docker volume creation to stop the Docker container and start another Docker container with the name as web2 8080. So access the static website using EC2 instance public IP, which is hosted in the Nginx. Modified content should display here. Docker stop container, Docker volume, create a new volume. So create a new volume, right? Start the container by mounting the Docker volume. How you can count mounting the Docker volume? Docker run hyphen d name web app 20 hyphen mount source equal to new volume destination equal to this one. So hyphen p 880 nginx. The Docker exit web app 20 bash user CD user share nginx HTML echo welcome to BlueJ Technologies dot index.html. Access static website using EC2 VM public IP which is hosted by the Nginx. Stop the Docker container and Docker stop container ID and Docker run d hyphen name web app 21 mount source destination destination and port number 8080 Nginx server. Using host file, which two containers are using? So for example, index.html, it will be stop, or index.html or index.html. This is stops. It will not share the content. Okay. Mount the bounded mounting. What is that device? Named volume. So Docker container in the directory, you can directly mount it. So host directory mounting to the Docker container. Create a directory in the host mission mkdir-p Temp nginx HTML. Run the Docker container for an nginx image with the directory mounting. Docker run d-884 nginx user nginx hyphen name ci c1 nginx latest. See the container which are running Docker container ls access nginx web server using the host machine public IP. Go to the mount point and create the index.html. Index.html. Something like how I can mount my host mission directly to the Docker container, that is called as a bind mounting concept. Right, this is the normal mounting. So we directly connect to the USR share nginx HTML. Right. So as of now, what we learn? We learn something like these are the virtualization, containerization, Docker advantage of Docker setup, terminology, Docker file, Docker image, Docker hub, Docker container, image commands, so container commands, so Docker file, volume, so named volume, bind mount volume. So real world applications. Something like monolithic architecture application means everything will be part of one project. Monolithic applications are very difficult to maintain. Microservice. The whole functionality of the application divided into several sub projects which are easily maintainable. Set of APIs will be available and every API is one of the application so that API will container. So API will one container. Example, make my trip is mentioned in microservices architecture. So flights on one API, flights on some trains on one API, buses on one API, right, guys? So in the real time, all are using the microservices. Monolithic means the entire applications will be in the one service they are deploying. And microservice based applications, something like a product API, cart API, payment API, tracking API. For example, e-commerce. Once we product select the product site, then we can add to the cart. So once you will add the cart, right, so then payment. Once the payment is done, right, you guys can tracking your system. So every microservice having their own container. Guys, okay. So this is the microservice based application, flights, so trains, so buses. So Docker Compose will discuss tomorrow, guys. Okay. And we'll discuss about the containers also. We'll show you practically. Okay, we'll show you the practically from the Docker. How to create the Docker image from the Docker file. Okay, how to deploy application we'll show you tomorrow, guys. Okay, and Docker networks also we have a Docker network. Network is all about the communication. Docker network is used to provide isolated network for the Docker containers. In Docker, we have below three default networks. One is bridge network, host network, none network. So in Docker, we have networks driver, something like a bridge driver, host driver, none, no overlay, MESC VLAN. So bridge driver is recommended for driver when we are using standalone container. It will assign to the IP address for our Docker containers. Host driver is also use it to run the standalone containers, but it will not assign any IP address to the container, right? So local host and so there is a network concept, guys. We'll discuss tomorrow also. Okay? Yep, guys.